Hello and welcome to Accidentally Stubbing Your Toe. I'm Axiom, let's get into some history. Play intro. Howdy folks, this is basically the pilot for my channel. I hope you enjoyed learning about all random stuff I like, history, science, art, whatever. So, for the very special first installment of Axiom History, I'm going to be going over my favorite topic. Today we'll be talking about the deadliest plague in history, and it's not COVID-19, not yet at least. So sit back, relax, take a sip of tea, coffee, whatever else you have, and get ready. What is the Black Death? The Black Death, also known as pestilence, the Great Mortality, or the plague, I personally like pestilence the best, was a bubonic plague pandemic and the most fatal one in history. It was caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, and we'll touch on that in a second, but in simple terms, it was spread by fleas. It can also take a secondary form where it spread person-to-person contact via aerosols, basically just a fancy word for nasty coughing right into someone's face, causing septicemic or pneumonic plagues. Where did it originate? In the late Middle Ages, Europe experienced the deadliest disease outbreak in history when the Black Death, the infamous pandemic of bubonic plague, hit them, killing 1/3 of European human population. The Black Death originated in Central Asia and spread from Italy and then throughout other European countries. Some Arab historians believe the Black Death originated in Mongolia, and Chinese records also showed a huge outbreak in Mongolia as early as 1330s. So, let's go back to the beginning. The plague arrived in Europe October 1347, when 12 ships from the Black Sea docked at Sicily? People gathered on the docks were met by a horrifying surprise. Most sailors aboard the ships were dead, and those still alive were gravely ill and covered in black boils that oozed blood and pus. The authorities hastily ordered the fleet of death ships out of the harbor, but it was too late. Over the next 5 years, the Black Death would kill more than 20 million people in Europe, almost 1/3 of the continent's population. So, let us get into how the main type of plague spreads. The most common classification of this plague, bubonic. The bubonic plague is spread by bacteria Yersinia pestis. It can spread through contact with infected fleas. The fleas carrying the plague bite rats, drink their blood, and regurgitate back into the wound, infecting the rat and transporting the disease. Rats, which were common in medieval cities, had often had fleas on them, which greatly affected how fast it unfurled. The disease spread from rats to humans, who perpetrated it with their little medical knowledge. Coughing and body fluids were the main ways to spread it, pretty similar to COVID. So, quick summary. The fleas bit the rats, then the rats were in close contact to humans, which then spread it to the humans. Once the disease was in a person, it spread from person to person through their body fluids and coughing and that nasty stuff. It's simple enough, right? Now, before we get into the survival rate, let's say you had one type of this disease. So, pick a string. Bubonic, septicemic, or pneumonic. Got one? Good. Let's dive into your fate. The mortality of the bubonic strain was, for treated individuals, 1% to 15%. So, yeah, if you were treated, there's a high chance you'd be kind of fine. However, untreated, the rates would rise to about 50%. Your symptoms would include fever, headaches, chills, weakness, and one or more swollen, painful lymph nodes, often called buboes. If you had septicemic and were treated, you had about 40% odds of surviving. Left untreated, you would surely die. The incubation period of septicemic plague is poorly defined, but likely occurs within days of the exposure. You develop a fever, chills, extreme weakness, abdominal pain, and then possibly bleeding into the skin and other organs, so not the best. Finally, for those who have chosen pneumonic, the death rate for persons with this untreated primary pneumonic plague was reported to be almost 100%, though treated you'd have roughly 50-50 chance of actually living through it. The pneumonic plague, the first signs of illness are fever, headache, weakness, all that stuff, but you'd get rapidly developing pneumonia with shortness of breath, chest pain, cough, and sometimes bloody or watery sputum. The pneumonia progresses for 2 to 4 days and may cause respiratory failure and shock. So yeah, how'd you do? I'm sure all you need to memorize for the test, though, is buboes or swollen lymph nodes that the bubonic plague causes. Finally, we're at my favorite part, the doctors. Physicians relied on crude and unsophisticated techniques such as bloodletting and boil lancing. practices that were dangerous as well as very unsanitary. The superstitious practices such as burning herbs and bathing in rosewater or vinegar were also common. Meanwhile, in a panic, healthy people did all they could to avoid the sick, leaving their families, abandoning their loved ones. Now, a plague doctor was a physician who treated victims of the bubonic plague during the epidemics. They were hired by cities to treat infected patients regardless of income, especially the poor that couldn't afford to pay. They have a very signature and ominous look, I'm sure you've seen it. Their famous mask actually had a purpose though, other than looking really badass. Charles de Lorme, a plague doctor who treated 17th century royals, is often credited with the uniform. De Lorme had thought the beak shape of the mask would give the air sufficient time to be suffused by protective herbs before it hit the plague doctor's nostrils and lungs. You may be asking yourself, herbs? And yes, you heard that right. That's why they had the long beak shape. They stuck herbs into the beak and assumed it could hold off the plague, as well as deter the absolutely horrid stench of the sick and dead. Though the reasoning at the time was kind of solid, the herbs did basically nothing to hold them off from catching it. I guess it did smell slightly better, but nah, it's still pretty rank. When you think of their masks, I assume you think of one or two versions. The most common is the modern version, the long, crow-like look and the pointed beak that I've probably been showing this whole time. Heck, I own one of these, it's pretty cool. But however, there's an assumed original older version. The one in the times used to look more like this. It looked kind of like a rat, in my opinion, but I don't know, I think seeing this on your deathbed is pretty intimidating still. In conclusion, the Black Plague originated in Central Asia and was spread by fleas on rats. It's the most deadly plague in history, killing about 75 to 200 million people in Eurasia and North Africa, peaking in Europe in 1347 to 1351. The important medicine practices of the time did almost nothing to fewer those numbers either. Anywho, thanks for sticking through this short pilot to the end. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to give feedback or suggestions, or even give topics that I should cover. See you folks later. Thanks for watching.